Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Pete's CD Vinyl World. Today I wanted to do the 21st question thread started by James Griffiths. The cool thing about this thread is he's basically asking to do 20 questions about your first this or that, but you could sort of make up your own questions, so which is cool because, you know, not everyone's going to have the same first, right? Or can have the same first. Anyway, so I'll get started. First one of mine is first double album, and that would be Kiss Double Platinum. Back sometime in the 80s, I had this on double cassette. And next question I came up with, first CD that you bought with your own money. And that was Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy. So Christmas, I think 1986, I got a CD player and a few CDs. But I distinctly remember going to the mall and buying this album. Not sure why I picked this one, other than the fact that I really liked the song Over the Hills and Far Away at the time. So I think that's why I picked this. So that's the first CD I ever bought myself with my own money. First box set, that would be Queensryche Operation Live Crime. So Queensryche's a band I don't hear a lot of talk of on the VC, even from like the metal guys. So they were one of my favorite bands back in this era. So what this is on the Empire tour they performed the entire Operation Mindcrime live. That was the main part of the concert actually, and they put this set out, which is basically a CD of the live Operation Live Crime and actually a VHS that was at the time. They've since put this out on like a double CD DVD, but I still have the original box. The best thing about this is the book that comes with it. It's really cool, but that was my first box set. Next up, first blues album I ever got, and that would be Stevie Ray Vaughan, Couldn't Stand the Weather. I think I had vague recollection of hearing the title track of this, but I think when I bought it I also saw that he'd done Voodoo Child from Jimi Hendrix, so I think that's why I bought this one instead of his first one at the time. Next up, first album I learned how to play all the songs from, and that would be, I don't know, it could have been a Metallica one, but what comes to mind is the first Iron Maiden album. So a few of my friends in high school, before we like formed a real band, we used to play a lot of Iron Maiden, Metallica, that type of stuff. And I distinctly remember playing a lot of songs from this, and I remember back in that time period putting the cassette onto this and just playing along with the whole thing. So this is one of the first albums where I knew how to play every song from. Okay. First album you got that was released, or first album you bought through first day it was released. This was a tough one because they didn't make a big deal about release dates really until the 90s, but I distinctly remember getting Van Halen OU812 the first day it came out. So that definitely, I definitely recall that. Later on in the 90s it became a big thing about these releases, and sometimes they would release them at midnight the night before and stuff, if you remember that. First used album I ever bought, and that is the Alice Cooper Show. Got this sometime in the 80s. This is also my first Alice Cooper album. Had heard a couple songs from him, so I picked this up and I really liked it. It came out in, I think, 77 or 78. This is from the Lace and Whiskey tour. Next question I came up with, first album that you had a copy of that you didn't own, and that would be The Who, The Kids Are All Right. I remember seeing this movie on Saturday night back in the early days of MTV. They would show a concert usually on Saturday night, and they used to show this all the time. Several times a year. So my cousin had I believe a cassette copy of this, and I just dubbed a copy. I used to listen to that all the time, and finally got the album sometime probably in the late 80s or so. Okay. First soundtrack album. It's a soundtrack to a movie called The Wildlife. I think this came out in 85 or 86. Or 84. The reason I got this is there's a song called Donut City, which is an instrumental from Eddie Van Halen. And at the time, being a Van Halen freak, I had to get everything he played on. He didn't play on stuff outside of Van Halen very often at all, so I had picked this up. There's also a cool song from Charlie Sexton and Ron Wood on here too. So. Next up, first real metal album. And what I mean by metal is not, Kiss or Van Halen or AC/DC. So I would probably say Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast was my first real metal album. Next up, first album that scared the crap out of you. Another Alice Cooper album here. This is Welcome to My Nightmare. I mean, you listen to it now, it sounds kind of cheesy and hokey, but the second side of this with that whole Steven suite, if you put that on in the dark and listen to it, it is kind of creepy. It's creepy in a weird way, not a like a real scary way. It's just creepy in the sense of when you walk into one of those stores that has all those old like medical devices and all that crap. It's scary. It's creepy in that kind of way. First autographed album, and probably now that I think of it, my only autographed album, and that's Kiss, Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits. It's autographed by Bruce Kulick, and I'm not sure if you could see it. And that is a picture of me meeting Bruce with long hair and everything. So, first instrumental album. From what I recall, it was Joe Satriani. This is an EP called Dreaming Number 11. I had this on cassette back in the 80s. But I distinctly remember getting this before Surfing with the Alien, which was the one that came out previous to this. So, next up, first bootleg album. Got this back in the 80s sometimes, called Van Halen Now and Then. First side of this album is from the Fair Warning tour. I believe it has Mean Street, Ice Cream Man, and another one. It might even have Eddie solo. The second side is from the 5150 tour. And it has, I believe, a couple songs that weren't on Live Without a Net. Like it had Wild Thing, Good Enough, and something else. So I remember paying like $25 for this back in the day, and I thought I was like buying something like illegal or something, but that was my first bootleg album. I had a lot of bootleg cassettes before that, but they weren't like, they were just like blank cassettes that had concerts recorded on them. They weren't like that with a real cover and everything. First live album, had it on vinyl back in the day, Judas Priest Unleashed in the East. Still one of my favorite, not only live albums, but metal albums of all time. First female artist album. Believe it was this one. Pat Benatar. Precious Time. Big fan of hers back in the 80s. First album you bought that you hated. This was a tough one for me because usually I'm somewhat familiar with an album before I buy it, or at least one or two songs. And if an album even has only one or two songs I like, I don't generally hate it. But buying this album, I totally hated it when I first heard it. I was like, what the hell is this? This is not what you expect. It's almost borderline yacht rock. I appreciate it more now as I'm older. You Matter to Me is a pretty good song. There is some good stuff on here, but overall it's very schlocky, very cheesy. I can't imagine being a teenager when this came out and hearing this right after they had released Love Gone and everything. So, yeah, when I first got this back in the 80s, I completely hated it. I wasn't old enough to remember the solo album stuff. I was only 4 when these were released, but yeah, totally hated that. Okay, next up, first progressive album. My best of my guess is that was Be Fragile, yes. I had 90125 during the 80s before I got this one, but I don't consider that a real progressive album, so I figured I'd pick. I think Fragile was the first of their older albums I had gotten. And last, but no, it's not last. Second to last, number 19. First pop album. Now, interestingly, most kids or younger people start off probably listening to the pop, whatever's on the radio. I was kind of the opposite. The first band I liked, period, was Kiss. So after them, I started listening to more like Van Halen, AC/DC. I didn't appreciate pop until years later, but one band I always liked was Hall & Oates. And the song Out of Touch was on here. I remember picking this up because I like them a lot. So I listen. It's funny. Over the years I've listened to more pop and different types of music more than I did when I was a kid. And last but not least, the 20th question I came up with, first 60s album. And that would be Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? I believe I had this on cassette when I was a kid. This is the reissue with some bonus tracks. So yeah, that's my first 60s album. Anyway, give James Griffiths' site a watch and subscription. And do your own 21st. Like I said, it's cool because you can come up with your own 20 questions. So anyway, thanks a lot.